So we would look at it, on the balance of what's happening within the organisation.
The argument about bureaucratic structures and problems for the public benefit has also been in some of our submissions. What is the bureaucracy of your organisation? How many people are employed? How much does it cost to run it?
Well, when we went through the registration process, we were up to around about 65 staff because we had a large number of 30,000 applications coming in something like 18 months. So we needed to work our way through that. We're probably down to about 40 now for the 25,000 organisations, and that's because we're covering a number of things. And I'd also have to say that we're not into business as usual yet. So we're still treading carefully through some of our activities. So the things that we've got is we've got a small number of staff because we receive around about 2,500 new applications for registration each year. We have a staff which we're still trying to work out is appropriate for the monitoring of charities and for the dealing and for investigating charities. And investigations will come about because, one, there's been a complaint, two, because we see something that we don't like, or three, in some cases where we've registered an organisation, we're not convinced that they're going to be charitable, and so we will review them after a year. And now we're also developing our education function, so that's an additional function which I wouldn't say is a bureaucratic function, but it still contributes to the size of the organisation.
I use the term bureaucratic in its literal meaning, that is efficient organisation.
Well, that's always when you're on the side of the bureaucrats, they always are efficient. It's that's the people right. On the other end who don't always acknowledge that.
Well, let's not go there.
Can I just say, see, one of the things which it's part of the culture of the organisation. I've come from having had a regulatory background, but one of working in the community. And most of our staff have had a lot of experience working in the community. So we're always looking at how we can make this easy. And I'd have to say this charities law is incredibly difficult. And how do you get this stuff which is incredibly difficult and explain it to Mrs. Smith and Bowra? So you have to, on the one hand, you have to have sufficient information which is useful for lawyers. On the other hand, you have to have something for the person who's working at the kitchen sink to understand what it is that you're doing. And that's the balance that we as an organisation have to try and juggle all of the time.
Okay, just my last question, double question here. Is there an appeal process from your decisions?
Yes.
And can you outline that to us? And secondly, is there a best practice emerging internationally about dealing with charities, an international best practice?
Yeah, well, the first thing is that in terms of appeals, our board, or my board, will make decisions about declines and deregistrations. After that, people can appeal to the High Court. We've currently had about 12 or 13 appeals to the High Court. Sadly, 3 of them were from my first decisions. And we currently have one case before the Court of Appeal. So we've got that going. That was the first question. I've gone and forgotten the
second question is there an emerging international best practice on regulation of charities?
I think there is. And the UK Charities Commission and the Scots and the Irish are all based on the commission type system, and they have started to add to the heads of charity, although you can get your own evidence from them, but my understanding is that the 4 heads still form the basis of what's happening. My observation is that there's 2 ways where people go. One is, or organisations or countries go. One is down through the tax system, where decisions are made within that, and the other is within the Charities Commission type system. And my observation tends to be that those that were in the tax system tend to be much more secretive, because that's the culture and that's the law around tax, whereas those in the charities commission type systems tend to be more transparent, because that's the way that it tends to go.
Thank you.
Xenophon.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett, for being here to give evidence on this. Can I just ask, does this cover churches as well, religious organisations per se?
Yes.
Right.
So every church that wishes to claim tax exemption would need to register with us.
Right.
And they'll need to go through the same tests.
So once an organisation has been registered and passed those tests, is there a mechanism for ongoing monitoring? For instance, if followers or former followers of a particular church said, look, these things are happening, they are sanctioned by the organisation, for instance, is that the sort of thing that you can revisit the charitable status of an organisation?
Yes. And we will do that. So we've already had some complaints, not about churches, but about other charities, which when we've looked at, we have carried out an investigation and deregistered them.
Yes.
Now, churches put you into a slightly more difficult environment, but we would do that.
Slightly more difficult way. Is there a constitutional fetter or?
No, it's and I think what the courts have said is that it's very difficult to make a judgment about a religious organisation and about the benefits of a particular religion. But if you then start to look down into the religion about some of the practices it might have, I mean, public benefit, for example, if we looked at a closed order religious organisation where everything was internalised, where the prayers were internalised, we would have to ask, is there a public benefit there? So the mere fact that it's a religion, while the courts have assumed that there will be a benefit, we would still go through a test. Or if a church, there were two things with church we could look at. If it restricted membership, prevented people from joining the church, we would ask about the public nature of the public benefit. If a church was involved with illegal practices, we would question the public benefit in that. So, I mean, this is taking it to an extreme. If it had human sacrifices, for example, or in cases animal sacrifices, where it was those practices were illegal, then we would have difficulty with that. And if a complaint came to us about that, then we would act on the complaint.
Sure. Just further to that, in the context of how this test operates, do you look at the books? Is there a requirement for tax returns to be filed or financial statements to be filed, or is it only on an as-needs basis if you've got concerns? Perhaps I'll rephrase it. If an organisation has got a significant amount of income and it has a tax-free status, is there a requirement to show that that isn't being siphoned off, that's not going perhaps either overseas or going to the hierarchy of the organisation where they're living very comfortably, in other words, beyond even on any commercial basis in terms of what is a reasonable level of remuneration? I mean, how far can you dig into this in terms of the books? Is there a requirement to file financial statements or tax returns or some sort of statement if they're tax-free?
Yeah, there's a requirement to file a financial return to us annually, and we will publish that information. Now, I suspect that, we've had churches who have then applied to us to have that information withheld. Our view is that public transparency is more important than withholding information. I was going to say, I think sometimes organisations might change their behaviour a little bit to try and hide information within their accounts. But because those accounts are public, we may look at them, excuse me, but if someone is particularly interested, then they will look at them themselves, and if they're concerned, they could put a complaint to us about it. I mean, one of the things which we've had with some of the charismatic churches, is that the media have taken an interest in the amount of money which is going into the organisation.